My name is Acyde. I am part of the team that worked on the curation of the Style In Revolt exhibition that's currently being viewed in Beijing. I am here today with a man who's basically an idol, a friend, a pioneer, and just a massive inspiration to all of us in the culture of street art, streetwear, graphic art, graffiti, modern art, painting, product design. The list goes on. His name is Futura.
Acyde, how are you? Nice to see you, my friend.
So you're currently in New York?
Yeah, super excited to talk to you about this and get a chance to speak with the audience there at Style In Revolt.
Just to tie this all in neatly, New York was where you were raised. Was that also where you were born?
I'm born in New York, been a lifelong New Yorker. I kind of feel, Acyde, my story is so connected to this city because of what was created here in the 70s, late 60s into the 70s. You know, a movement, the graffiti movement that I participated in as a teenager. And, you know, this is more than 40 years ago. It's damn near 50 years ago. So just to have that kind of a timeline on my beginning in the culture, which at that time was just young people expressing themselves by writing on walls, I had no possible idea, you know, that all of what has occurred would have occurred and, you know, find myself here with you.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because just to talk a little bit about that specific period in New York City, I feel like in relation to this exhibition, New York really might be the nucleus for this idea that we currently exist in, which is this culmination and perfect meeting point of what you guys were doing at the time, which is expressing yourself with spray cans, a music scene that was burgeoning. Well, several music scenes, actually. You know, punk was happening simultaneously. Then you had, you know, hip hop was happening in the Bronx. And then at the same time, out of those came street style because, you know, all the young people had to wear something. They had to invent their own style of dress and code. And whether those were Adidas tracksuits or whether they were, you know, ripped jeans or whatever it was. So New York to me kind of feels like the ground zero for essentially what this exhibition is about. To go further into that, what inspired you to do your specific thing? Were you always artistic as a child? Were you into drawing? Were you into painting? And then that sort of translated into spray can art? Or was it just an exploration of you know, just expressing yourself at the time?
I mean, for me, it was more, I wasn't super artistic, you know, as a kid. I was into visual stuff, you know, because at the time growing up in the 60s, you know, 1970, when I started writing graffiti, I'm a 15-year-old. So, you know, any 15-year-old today is pretty open to whatever, you know, that teenage experience into young, you know, adulthood might offer them. And for me, it was this writing on the wall that I saw people do, you know, using this as a form of expression. And I was just overwhelmed by what I thought was a movement I could join. You know, it was hundreds of people doing it. So once again, I mean, coming up with the name Futura 2000 in 1970 may have been a bit of a, you know, kind of being a visionary there, but it would be 10 years later that I break ground, no pun intended, with the abstract train I painted. But all these things, honestly, Acyde, and, you know, I have to be honest, they all happened spontaneously through that moment in my life and not a lot of conscious thought into what I was even doing. You know what I mean? I was just living my life. I was just grabbing inspiration wherever I saw it, you know, short of, you know, stealing from other folks. But just to say that, and that, you know, talks about being an original. I think part of what we did here in the city, whether it's our style, you talk about how we wore our clothing, you know, because street kids don't have transportation. Okay, you have the subway, you have the bus, you have the street, and so you're walking it and constantly, you know, as you're being seen, that's you. You're projecting who you are and how you want to be interpreted by the, you know, the others. So style was a big thing, looking fresh, you know, being, you know, I mean, people I remember who were style gurus, like a Phase 2, like a Dondi, you know, guys from my culture, rest in peace, memorable human beings, you know, who contributed so much, you know, which is why I stay humble, Acyde, because it's like a lot of other people, you know, I'm not really standing on the shoulders of giants. You know, I remember those guys a lot. and I know it's a lot to do with the group effort. 80, 81, the French had already arrived in the city, and they were, oh, wow, what's that? What's this? And if you went to a park at that time, Acyde, as you could see now in any city perhaps around the world, you'd have some kids breakdancing. You'd have perhaps a DJ on the turntables, an MC just kind of riffing, blah, 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 and freestyle. And then some graph kids painting. And, oh, by the way, there might be some girls jumping rope. So here you have this whole thing happening like another Sunday in the city. And people were like, oh, snap. However, for me, my walk through my history is always marked by moments when I hung with someone, so-and-so, wherever it may be in the world. And I always valued those human contacts, you know what I mean? Because I always see things as strong memories that you can build upon. And it's easier to say that now, so many years later. But even when things were happening, I tried to be aware. I try to be like, wow, this is like, look at us. We're here. 2 months ago, we were sitting on, where were we? Union Square, trying to catch the train. So all of those things at that time were very meaningful for us. And we had a big feeling of arrival, because I always thought that how the Black musicians went through Europe and got put on, and then they came back home and they were celebrated, was kind of what was happening for us. I don't know about the rap kids. I didn't really care even about them. I was thinking about us, like the graph kids, through Wild Style, Style Wars, Subway art, and spray can art. Those are like the four, like if there's a Mount Rushmore of data. And I'll throw in Faith of Graffiti. Okay, so there's your 5 reference points.
So to interject, sorry, Futura,
Sure.
because I know there are going to be people here who aren't catching these references, and I think they're very important.
Well, you can make that available through the, you can link people to these publications. I think that's very important also that young people have access.
Yes, the film Wild Style,
Yeah, Wild Style and Style Wars. Those are films made in the same time we were on the rap tour in 1982. They had already made Style Wars and they had already made Wild Style. They may or may not have been released till 83 or whatever, but those films were being made in the very early days of the 80s, 81, 82, when everything was real and kind of not out the box yet, right? Because once we go to Paris and come to you guys in the UK, cat's out the bag. Everybody's seen it now. How many B-boys came from that one night who saw that? Because there's no media. It would take you a year to see a photograph that a photographer would have taken. You know what I mean? There was no immediacy of anything. So in that sense, all that really occurred was what happened at that moment. You needed to be either an eyewitness, because otherwise you're always one degree away from reality of somebody telling you the story. You know what I mean? It's like, to me, being an eyewitness to something, well, obviously, put me in court, I'll raise my hand. I'll tell you exactly what I saw. And one of the things I'm really happy about, Acyde, is with all of what I've done, and you're right, oh damn, you got like a cool resume. It's just being an eyewitness to this whole history.
I would obviously agree with you, but you are more than an eyewitness. You are a participant and a proponent of all of this. To be fair, I think now,
well, I'm also a consumer. I'm also like, I could be the fan and the guy, right? Because in a way, I get the magnetism, that I try to create, or that other people have created that I gravitate to as well.
Here's an interesting line to draw. When did you understand that there was a clear connection between what you were doing with graffiti, what you eventually went on to do with your graphic art and your actual painting, what we now consider streetwear, and the active lifestyle of skateboarding and just, basketball, basically street sports? When did you when did it crystallize for you that, hold on, this is actually a linked bunch of atoms that kind of fold into this thing that we are now calling, like, I guess, lifestyle or streetwear or street culture? When did that did you have a moment where that sort of crystallized for you at all?
I think the year 2000 in a way, right? Because that's a great moment for me. I think I was 45. And now the internet is already up and running. And I got my little website there and I'm trying to communicate now on this new, whatever the future was going to be. But by then it dawned on me that, this thing is going to become this. Because I always looked at individuals around the world before email and whatever, you got phone numbers, people landline, you still leave messages as satellites like-minded creative folks around the planet who are more or less, we're all from one tribe, right? So
Yeah.
you find one another, and then it's important to establish relationships and friends. You know what I mean? Like, I was very cognizant of that, whether it's my experience in the military when I was a kid, like understanding how you arrive in a foreign place, and rather than being someone that comes, you put a flag, yo, I'm here. No, you incorporate with the local folks. You know what I mean? You find a way to get in there. And it's not about being a threat, but it's just being smart and get your outreach. And once the web started, well, then, I'm pinging people. I got a guy in like Cape Town. I got somebody in HK. I got a kid in Osaka. I got some young kid in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm starting to meet people from all over, and I'm talking to them directly. So for me, it was like the web was like graffiti on steroids, that you could throw stuff up. Advertising was always a heavy duty thing growing up. They just hitting you. I mean, forget how it is now. You can't even turn on your phone without somebody trying to sell you something. But I was always very aware of that. And I think that's how graffiti found its space, because, hey guys, you got messages, we got messages. And oh, by the way, it's not based on trying to separate you from your money. It's just us being wild in the streets. So the advertising thing and the public thing of, bloop, bloop, that can be applied also not to let's make money. No, let's establish relationship. You know what I mean? Like, you can be more clever, and it doesn't always have to be around, hey, I'm trying to sell you something. How about I'm trying to sell you my friendship? How about I'm trying to sell you, hey, when you come to New York, I got you. I'm your man, like, let me be your dog over here, right? Like, when you come here, you need references. You want to know who's who, what's what. Let's establish that kind of a clique. And that's kind of what happened, A-Side, over a quarter century.
When did you then obviously, anyone who knows your history and anyone who's done the research will know that, you moved into the gallery space in a very organic way, right? From the subway art that you were doing, from the spray can art, you moved that into gallery space pretty early on in the game. But just to give us a kind of timeline of subway art, gallery art, then when I guess you could be recognized formally as a designer, because you are a product designer as well. Like, I remember that my earliest interaction with the idea of like toys that weren't just made for children probably came from a lot of what you created, right, with your figures. And also, when I first encountered the idea of art and music being a kind of singular entity, even before I understood what Peter Saville was doing at Factory Records, I understood your work with Mo Wax was very pivotal to that, right? Which is you were essentially a designer for sound designers in terms of your work and your packaging.
No, I mean, that's a very unique place to be at that time. Also, this would be like in the 90s, in the early 90s. Leading into what I said I thought was really the moment now at the end of that decade and century. But yeah, Mowax is very important because what you're saying there of my artwork, really, and what was great about it is the presentation of all of that on all those discs was that they didn't necessarily background me and put a lot of text and logos and shit. It was very clean. The aesthetic visually of what we did there and the vision of all that was remarkable and got me, we're talking about something that's 25 years ago. So enter the individual who's 18 to 30, you know what I mean? There's a demographic of who was into that then. Well, just add the numbers to now. And all of those people who came through that window, I got an immense kind of opportunity to come back in a way as an artist, because I was doing graphics in the 90s. I was doing a bunch of other things because I was a little sour on the art world. Oh, by the way, Jean-Michel is gone. Keith Haring is gone. People are already gone now from the 80s that were part of all of that beginning. And I was looking for different things to do. Graphics, the translation of what we were doing on subways, props to PNB Nation. Stash was with me on all that effort. How we segued from galleries to what was then in the 90s now, because I felt people were over it. And fortunately, as we talk about streetwear and then street art, by that time, the street art movement was not yet there. There weren't enough people who had arrived to really. That's why I think 2000 is a great number there for a lot of reasons, because by the time these young artists emerge even my contemporaries of today, you know, the Shepherd Fairies, the Space Invaders, you know, the people around the planet, young artists who were inspired by everything that had been happening there. You know, maybe they were too young and they needed a decade to arrive. But when they arrived, it seemed like simultaneously people were arriving from all over the world with great talents and this ability to paint in large scales. And the street art movement was just, it blew up.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And I think that, you know, just to revisit a little bit about the Moax thing, because I think that maybe history has been unfair to certain people. You know, history serves us justly once we can look back on it. But once you're in a moment, because I think what's really important to clarify about Moax for people who don't know is that Moax was a British record label, which was created by a man called James Lavelle, who's also involved in the curation of this. And he was really young at the time. I remember meeting James, and he was maybe a year older than me or something at the time. He was just out of his teenage years when he started this record label. But what's really specific about Moax is I think at that time, and correct me if I'm wrong, I really think he might have been ground zero for what we now know as a global culture in terms of connecting someone like yourself, who a New York street art legend, to do the artwork. He had musicians and producers from all over the world contributing music to this label that was based out of London. But I also remember that going to Moax was the first time for me that I encountered people wearing Stussy. It was people like Charlie Dark who were working there wearing Stussy. Fraser Cook, who's a part of this exhibition, worked at Moax for a while. You know, he was one of, I'm not even sure what Fraser did in the office, actually. I just knew
just public relations.
Public relations. And also that was the first time I'd heard of your working at this and stashes, seeing people collecting sneakers, you know, the kids who worked there. Toby, who worked for Nigo, who now is the man behind Cavent, worked at Moax. He was there. It was Deep Shadow's first records outside of America, came out on Moax Records. The Beastie Boys, their keyboard player, was putting out music on. And now we take it for granted that people are into sneakers, they're into records, they're into beats, they're into graphic arts. And then also Moax was pretty much, I would say, the ground zero for introducing, and, you know, I will stand corrected on this, but I believe introducing a bathing ape really to a wider audience outside of Japan. I would give James Lavelle and Moax credit for that, because James was going to Japan and he met Nigo, and he was the first person on this planet that I ever saw in a bathing ape t-shirt. And this is a true story.
And later, one of those fly jackets. He's a visionary as well. And what you're saying about putting people together, right? It's not just
exactly that.
Because I think at that point you take on producer, but not producer, let's say just in the music industry, but, you know, director, and this kind of understanding of, okay, if I get this individual, that individual. And like I say, I'll always be grateful, because in a way, my first book came out of there. Ben did an incredible job, you know, on the design of my book, my first book. And also what you were saying before about like toy, you know, action figure collectible, because James was he had been a collector. You know, he was like really the first collector. You're talking about all those things, whether it's tees, jackets, sneakers, this, that, the other.
He was the first person that I met that now what people might term hypebeast culture, which is in its own way a passe term. For me, he might have been the very first human being that I met on this planet that had that impulse and appetite to be interested in all these various mediums and collect them.
Perhaps people don't know that it does trace back to something like that, which seemingly after the tidal wave of all of these other entities that are built upon the foundations that other people had, you know, it's like, oh, he actually did the architecture, you know, of that particular wing. But people are up here, right? They're already up on the 9th floor, right? And they're not aware necessarily of like
the ground
who did the architecture, who came in and did the contracting. Some shit was fugazi. They had to get other people to come in and, you know, rebuttress, you know, the mistakes and stuff. So to me, the beauty of those satellite individuals, and certainly James was one of them, and then Nigo would become one of them, and Hiroshi became one of them, and Fraser, you know, because then after all of those things that happened, Fraser gets us out there, me, Lee Quinones, and Stash on that Contents Under Pressure show in 97-ish, right? And so we're kind of walking the timeline up to the millennium.
What was the initial impulse that led you to decide to create your own clothing brand? Because you spoke about GFS, Not for
Yep.
concentrate. What you
And
did
then
was
we had Project Dragon, right?
that's right,
We had
right.
GFS, and then we had BSF, right? It was a comedy on our subway system, lettered subway lines we have here in New York City. BFS, Blue Futura Stash, Blue, rest in peace, such a great friend and awesome guy. We lost him some years ago, but Project Dragon was the pet name for that company. And when we did that into the middle 90s, eventually that brand dissolved. And as I was doing GFS, working with Stash, with Subway sometime, Project Dragon, I decided, okay, it's completely a classic. You know, it's like I'm in a group, but then you go solo. Right. You know, so I was in this group, like a trio. And then I said, okay, well, I could just go on my own and do my own Futura Laboratories thing. And that was wonderful. You know, I had that running. I had the shop almost for 8 years in Fukuoka, Japan. And it was wonderful. I had a great team working with me. And we did some kooky things over the years. But I look back now, I'm actually been buying stuff on eBay and wherever I can get like old Futura Laboratory stuff. And more recently, we rebooted it, obviously, because
I have a present for you. I have Fraser's old Project Z T-shirt. So I have that.
wow. Okay.
I'm gonna send it to you.
I will accept that.
Yeah, no,
Thank
I'm
you.
gonna send it. He had it, then I took it, and it's been sitting in my archives. But it
All
belongs
right.
to you, really. So if you're recollecting,
I would
yeah,
appreciate that. Yeah.
I will get that over to you. When you decided to interpret your art into doing subways, as we said,
Yep.
into gallery art, into records design, you know,
Yeah.
into toy design, then into the clothing design. For you, did you ever see yourself as a designer purely or as an artist purely? Or did you, both forms made sense to you?
Well, I mean, you know, by the time I really started, you know, honing in on what I could do and what I was good at, been a solo individual in terms of how I do my thing, you know, certainly my artwork, you know, it's just me doing that, no doubt. But with graphics and stuff, you know, it was cool to have a team. And then, you know, you're working with other people who have other skills, whether it's a sculptor who can now help me realize certain other three-dimensional forms of my work. I don't really see myself as a designer. I mean, I think it's all encompassing for me. You know, I just try to do stuff, and it's kind of like, could be the few years I picked up a camera and wandered around taking pictures. It could be, you know, other experiences I've had in my life that aren't geared always around my identity as an artist. You know, every day I'm who I am and I fulfill that, you know, but sometime given my position and, you know, fame, whatever you want to call it, like, I like to step away from that, you know what I mean? And like not care so much about all that as well. It's, like I say, I'm just grateful that we're here and it's 2022. I mean, it's kind of hard to believe. I'm just here for like another 20 quarter century, you know, is what I'm asking. If I could just remain on the planet and continue to try to do stuff. And, you know, I'm always evolving, Acyde. You know, I'm like, I don't like to sit back and tell people, oh, yo, you know, look at what I did and blah, blah, blah. You know, I prefer to keep creating on multiple levels and share my work with others and, you know, work with other individuals who inspire me. Hopefully, you know, maybe I'm an inspiration to them as well. Or, you know,
I know you
like to
definitely
someone.
No, I believe you. I mean, you are one of the most inspirational because I think to sum this up, you might be singular in a sense of that you have been around for every decade and participated, not just you weren't just in existence, you participated in
Sure.
every decade that has been important to lead up to this decade of style and streetwear and street culture as we know it. You know, if we're talking about the 70s with graffiti, if we're talking about 80s with gallery artwork, if we're talking about the 90s with design and mixing that with tech moving into the 2000s, and you remain relevant and working. Let's bring it a little bit to where the exhibition has been held, Beijing.
Awesome. I mean, I think you know, my impression of that place is beyond Tiananmen and the whole Forbidden, you know, that whole setup. It's one of the most incredible tours I've ever seen on the planet. I was there in 2007. I had an audio tour walking through, and it was Roger Moore that they had, you know, because you could get different languages for all your whatever, like, and my tour guide was Roger Moore, and It was just so super memorable. That was my first time in Beijing. But yeah, love it there. I wish I could be there for Style In Revolt.
We all do. We all do. I
Maybe,
mean,
who knows?
4 or 5 decades into your careers, not one, but
Yep.
careers.
Mm-hmm.
Look into the future. You know, Futura 2000 is now Futura 2022.
Yeah,
Going into Futura 3000.
I
What
know. Shout out to
inspires
Andre.
you? Shout out to Andre 3000. Another pioneer. What inspires you? I mean, you know, 4 decades in, you know, you're still super fresh. You still have so much energy. You're still pumping out amazing art. Just, I think for anyone who's listening to this or watching this, who might at some point, because I think what happens a lot is that age stains people in interesting ways, and that some people grow old gracefully, or grow up gracefully, should I say, and they
Sure.
just become better over time. Their work becomes better, their ways of looking at the world becomes better, and they remain fresh. And a lot of people don't, right? Which is what I've noticed with you is that you stay inspired, you stay in the moment, and your work all remains energetic and it remains fresh. How do you manage to have that perspective? What keeps you motivated and inspired in that way to keep you going? Where you know it never seems to be about your past; it seems to be about your now.
You know, continuing a side like I said. I mean, you know, throughout my life, as a mantra for myself, you know, arrogance, complacency, and greed. Those three elements I try very hard to avoid because at this point in my life, I'm blessed by the fact that like I don't really have you know, I'm not out here hustling like I was 40 years ago. You know, I got my thing a little more refined. Like you said, I've grown older, but I've grown wiser. I'm certainly more patient. You know, I'm relatively, hey, I could take a hit. I could take creative criticism. You know, you have something you want to call me on, by all means. You know, I'm not like, I mean, I try to stay energetic because, well, that's just in me. You know, that's just how I am. I'm fortunate. You know, I'm going to be double sixes this year. That's a crazy number for me. But I certainly know in my heart of hearts, like, I'm not that. You know, I'm much younger. I'm much, you know, my flame is still kind of burning in there. And once again, there's no greed. You know, there's just nothing out there but just do good work. I mean, at this point now, I just want to make good work because I think the legacy really, you know, it's beyond me now here. It's like, let's think about, you want to be Futura 3000? Let's imagine what would that be? God, that's going to be 1,000, you know, 78 years from, you know, when's it going to be the year 3000, right? And who knows what might be? Who has any? I mean, we don't even know if we'll be here.
Thank you very much for doing this. I think that we've pretty much covered, hopefully.
We did. We had a good chit chat there.
Everything that matters. Is there anything left to declare? As I say to you, as you go through immigration, do you have anything to declare?
No, I would have to say I have nothing to declare other than thank you